Shazam, the world's mightiest mortal, was once humiliated by a Maya god. But it sucked how they depicted the Maya people, and really all of Latin America, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The name's Garcia, and I'm a professional comic book writer and a professional comic book historian. That's right, I've been paid by Disney to read comic books. I worked on characters like Feathered Serpent here, or Feathered Serpent here, and other characters not called Feathered Serpent, like the son of Satan, who's actually the son of Loki, but or this character who is also Mesoamerican, sort of, but I've got problems with that one, but that's for another day. Often we think of Mexico and its depiction in mass media as being sepia tone, and this is true for comics as well, going all the way back to as far back as comics go. People who are part of Latinidad have not always been shown in the best light, and they still aren't. Remember in 2022 when they thought that the best way to show Kyle Rayner's Hispanic heritage was to have him carrying tamales, which they later said was no, that was just one of many options. This is the option we meant to use, which was also the artist's original version. Whatever, they got better the next year. Those familiar with comic book history will know that pretty much everybody who was not straight, white, and male was not always depicted in the best light. And for the 1940s, this is particularly true for African Americans and Asian Americans. This was both anti-blackness and what initially was the yellow peril against China became everything they did against the Japanese people. But Mexicans and other Latinos were not spared. In fact, I can't think of a better example to use in a single image than this by Will Eisner. If you're not familiar, he is the guy the comic book Oscars are named after. And yes, while the Eisners are very prestigious, and Will Eisner did a whole lot for the medium, he also did stuff of the era that we don't really feel aged well. So here we have a stereotypical, really racist depiction of a black kid being afraid of a really racist depiction of he's a Cuban wearing a sombrero. It's not going to worry about it right now because let's get to the other part. See, I want to focus on how American comics depicted Latin America. And for that, I want to look at really two things, which is both how they depicted the modern day people of Latin America, especially Mexico and other areas that are, basically depicted as Mexico most of the time, and the indigenous cultures that were there, especially those of Mesoamerica and the Andean region, because they were, popular tropes at the time. Language was also an issue. This is what I would call the "this is it" problem, which is whenever they would depict somebody speaking with a Spanish accent, they would just put a bunch of double E's in there because, sure. Now, this did happen with the newspaper comic strip Gordo, especially toward the beginning, but that developed into a very, very highly respected comic that did a lot to introduce Latino culture to the whiter America. But others that tried to copy him didn't do as good of a job. Let's look at Mesoamerica, which includes the groups that we would today call the Aztecs and the Maya. Both terms actually are really umbrellas that apply to several groups. But either way, these groups, along with Andean cultures, get lumped together into just kind of a hodgepodge of this is an ancient culture that would show up in several old comics, as well as pulps, penny dreadfuls, and later dime novels. In most of these cases, these cultures are shown to still exist as they did hundreds of years ago, somewhere hidden in the mountains or jungles or somewhere. And of course, that means that they have not at all developed technologically or culturally in the intervening centuries because, I guess, why would they? But they are also often depicted worshiping things they don't understand. Sometimes this can be as simple as, this is a white person, let's worship them. Other times it can be, hey, you just showed up, we're going to worship you. And then other times it'll be, hey, this person has superpowers, they can fly, bullets bounce off them, they can throw buildings, let's worship them. And of course the people in the story, the white people in the story will say, these silly people, don't they know it's just a superhero because that's a normal thing that the world has? This leads to another trope, which would be the gods have spoken, and that is the idea that there is a statue or some other depiction of the gods that now speaks, because this would be somebody tricking them into believing one thing or another. Although a few times they've had superheroes actually make the gods come alive, and then, oh, they got tricked because the statue actually walked around. Whatever. To demonstrate, let me get into the story of Ken Masters. No, not the Street Fighter, but rather a character from Marvel Comics #1, although he also appeared in other comics like the Masked Marvel or Amazing Mystery Funnies, because the comics were Wild West back then and nobody really cared about IP protection. Regardless, this perfectly demonstrates what I'm talking about. Note, I also wrote the profile of Ken Masters when I worked at Marvel Comics. Ken Masters, faithful bodyguard, Professor Roberts, and his nephew Tim. Now, why does that setup sound familiar? Anyway, they find a hidden Aztec city where life has gone unchanged for hundreds of years because, of course they do. They find a golden statue sacred to the people. So of course, Master says, "That belongs in a museum!" and beats up a bunch of Aztecs to take it. Naturally, this angers the locals, but Masters and company make a quick getaway, planning to do this all again another day to another people. Yeah, the rugged scientist adventure thing has been going on for a long time. And all that established, let's get back to Shazam, or as he should properly be known, Captain Marvel. Shazam! Yes, young Billy Batson would say a magic word and become the world's mightiest mortal.
Shazam! Betty! Betty!
How did you get here?
Well, never mind that. We got more important things to worry about.
Of course, his comics were very, very popular in the 1940s, so popular that they actually outsold Superman for a time, something that led to lawsuits. I'm not going to get into the long, drawn-out legal battle right now, but suffice to say, eventually, Captain Marvel, Shazam stopped publishing, and even later, eventually, DC purchased him, so now he's part of the DC multiverse. But that's not what we're talking about right now. I want to talk about 1941's Whiz Comics 22, which was also kinda sort of a sequel to Captain Marvel's live-action theatrical debut, The Adventures of Captain Marvel, also from 1941. This was a movie serial, which was something that was very common back in the day. Think of them as what 80s and 90s kids would call Saturday morning cartoons. They would be a episode of their favorite adventure story in a movie theater that they'd go see once a week. This was, of course, before TV and where Star Wars gets those weird episode numbers from and what inspired George Lucas. This one retells the origin of how Billy Batson became Captain Marvel.
I am Shazam.
My name is...
All is known to me. Your name is Billy Batson.
Sort of. It's close enough.
It is the duty of Captain Marvel to protect the innocent from its evil use.
But who is Captain Marvel?
You are, my son. All that is necessary is to repeat my name. Shazam.
Shazam.
It also has Billy trying really hard to defend indigenous people, at least for a bit.
The only reason I financed this expedition was to examine the contents of that tomb.
Surely you're not going to be stopped by a native curse. It's superstitious nonsense.
That's what everybody said about the curse of King Tut's tomb, but a lot of them died.
We'll handle this, Billy. We'll open the tomb at once. We'll strike camp in the morning and be well on our way before there is any further danger from the natives.
Because he says, hey, why should we go in and steal other people's stuff?
It was robbing a grave right now.
You afraid, Billy?
No, sir. I just don't want to pry into anybody's secrets. I'll go into these passages and remove that pottery for you, but I don't want any part of this.
Very well.
Billy Batson is the wisest one among us.
Importantly, this film introduces audiences to Professor John Malcolm, an intrepid explorer and archaeologist and grave robber, really, as well as the young man who is Billy Batson's equal and friend, Whitey Murphy. Yes, Whitey was not an uncommon name back in the 40s. Wiz Comics 22 picks up where the serial left off, with Captain Marvel in the Temple of It's a Lotta Wee. It's a Lotta Wee? We're really trying with that one. Billy is visited by his old friend Whitey. I feel like we were dangerously close to having Captain Marvel Jr. actually be a kid named Whitey. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Mr. Malcolm has disappeared in the jungles of Guatemala, so of course it's up to Billy and Whitey to find him in the, primitive country. This leads to the predictably racist depictions of Central Americans. To put it bluntly, yeesh. And then indigenous people show up to chase Billy away. Of course, he turns into Captain Marvel in front of them because who cares if they know his secret identity? These people aren't going to be important to him in the future, clearly. As Captain Marvel, he speaks a nonsense version of what's supposed to be a Maya language. There are some real words thrown in here, like Chichen Itza, which is a real place, Chico Zapote, which is a real fruit, Yumkash, who is a real god, and a phrase uttered by the parrot that seems very inappropriate for a children's book, depending on which country you're from. Excuse my pronunciation, I don't speak any of these languages. Of course, this means the people follow and apparently worship him, and if you're wondering how could he do this, well, he has the wisdom of Solomon, allowing him to speak, or pretend to speak, to just about any language. Immediately after that, he does something very stupid. I don't know if this is actually intended to be something that is ironic, probably not, but we'll get to that. Billy finds a hidden Maya temple because, of course he does. Then he's attacked by hundreds of monkeys because, why not? We get to see what is often a problem for young Billy, which is whenever somebody covers his mouth, he is unable to say Shazam and transform into Captain Marvel. And here, of course, he's being attacked by hundreds of monkeys. So how could he possibly say this? He doesn't. Instead, the red-crowned parrot does? Apparently this is something that works. I don't know if it's happened since or before then, but normally when somebody is able to say the magic word and it has actual magic power behind it, they transform. In this case, the parrot helpfully transformed Billy. Then we meet the young lady from the first picture, who helpfully talks to animals and gets the monkeys off Captain Marvel. We get more of this nonsense language as she adds a couple words from Nahuatl, including Tibet, meaning hill or mountain, and Quetzal, meaning feather or the Quetzal bird. Whatever, she seems to be around the same age Billy and Whitey are as they comment on how cute she is. All seems to go well until that night, when the god of monkeys appears. It's a Lotta Wee. Billy immediately runs out screaming, and then remembers, wait a minute, I'm a superhero. So once again, he yells, Shazam! I'm recording. Captain Marvel attacks It's a Lotta Wee, who seemingly attacks back, and it seems like the mightiest mortal is having trouble fighting this stone god. Meanwhile, Whitey goes off on his own adventure and finds Mr. Malcolm. With Malcolm recovered, we find out that Captain Marvel did eventually defeat It's a Lotta Wee because he realized, well, it was a statue. Turns out it wasn't so much punching him as wobbling like a weeble.
Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down.
I actually think it's a nice touch here in that while usually the statues coming to life are there to trick the indigenous people, in this case, it is the visiting Americans who are tricked by it, albeit briefly. Helpfully, Captain Marvel decides to put everything back where it was, which is not something that was done very often back in those days. It's helpful that Professor Malcolm was there. As it turns out, he was suffering from tropical fever, which is kind of a vague assortment of illnesses that white people got when they went into the jungle. Once he's better, he says, we should leave these people alone, which sounds very modern and progressive until you get into his reasons. You wouldn't want to see the Indians, like this little girl, having to go to work in the white man's camps, would you? Civilization would spoil them. Because, yes, nothing helps like talking down to people as if they are children. With that, the young lady who, Malcolm confirmed is a kid, says goodbye to Whitey and Billy in English. Now some behind the scenes on this issue. Thanks to Tom Heintius of Hogan's Alley magazine, who interviewed C.C. Beck, we learned that this is actually the only comic of Captain Marvel ever written by C.C. Beck. C.C. Beck co-created Captain Marvel with writer Bill Parker, although often Otto Binder is credited with a lot of the more famous stories. And C.C. Beck's unique cartoony art style is often credited as really elevating the platform of comics, although he also created a horrible character of a black person when he was saying that he wanted to be more inclusive. At any rate, this is the only issue that he actually wrote, so that's something. It's interesting that he chose to make it a sequel of the movie, clearly inspired by the movie that had been inspired by his work. And it's also interesting that he chose Mesoamerica as the place. Apparently this was something that stuck with him for a long time because over the years he would redraw it. He painted a version of it in 1976 and again in 1978. You can tell in both versions that he focused a little bit too much attention on who has been established to be a young girl. So where does this bring us all today? Well, I just wanted to establish that this is a very typical depiction of Mesoamerica in comics of the 40s and 50s. In fact, this came up a couple years back when Wakanda Forever came out, as somebody who wrote Namor's life story for Namor the First Mutant #1, and somebody who's written comics about Mesoamerica. I loved the idea of Namor becoming Mesoamerican, but I did not appreciate the way they depicted him in the story, in which he is worshipped as a god, in which technology is shown not to have developed in 500 years, in which, well, a lot of these tropes get repeated. Interestingly, the actual script of Wakanda Forever actually answered many of my concerns, but that's another story. We have come a long way since then, but we have to be careful not to backslide. It's important that we have things like Marvel Voices that spotlight characters from a community by creators from that community. And that includes new characters like Eva Quintero here, who has not appeared very much, but was created by my friend Terry Bloss to show somebody connecting to her own heritage to make magic. While as other sorcerers often use Nordic runes or something similar, she uses actual Maya glyphs to access her magic. And I think that's really what it comes down to. We need to see more things made by people in a community to tell those stories. Now, that doesn't mean they're the only people that can tell a story, but it definitely means that it's good to have somebody in the room to, make sure those things don't go wrong. Was that really where I'm ending it? I guess so. I've got a few more videos I'm working on, but let me know what I should cover later. I cover not just characters from Latin America being depicted in American comics, but also all bits of really obscure comic book history, especially those that are mostly forgotten in today's world, but certainly characters who could use a revival. For example, there's this white kid who got his Superboy level powers from a golden Aztec heart that was made from actual Aztec people. I need to get into that another day, and this character should really be revisited.